I wanted to go into this saved by grace, saved by faith, and saved by actions. And now, guys, I'm not here to argue either. I'm not saying that you're saved by actions. I'm not saying that you're saved by either one of these things. What I'm going to tell you today is how they work together with each other. You know, I'm here we want to unite everyone, and I kind of don't want to fight over this. And people there's going to be those people. They're going to say, well, are you saved by actions? And my answer is going to be yes and no. Yes and no. But, before I get into this, there is one thing I really need right now. I really need a tissue. So she's going to just chuck it over. Throw it over to me, please. Just throw it. There you go. So I really need a tissue because my nose is running, and partly it's because the air conditioning is on super high blast, but I need it because I'm super hot. So give me 1 second. I'm going to blow my nose. Okay. All right, is it on now? Okay, yeah, that was like Noah's flood inside this paper. I just had the flood. No! I'm so stupid. All right. So there's this huge fight, right? There's this huge fight between, people say, are you saved by grace, saved by actions, or are you saved by grace, faith, or action? So we have these different things that, people do argue about. And I'm going to tell you this right now is the reason there's even an argument in the first place, right? Like the reason there's an argument even in the first place is because all three of those sides are actually in the Bible. It's actually there, right? So let me show you 3 verses that show each of those sides, like being saved by grace, saved by faith, and saved by actions, right? So the first one, very, very famous verse, probably the most famous verse when it comes to being saved by grace, which is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. And Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9 says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." Right? So when you look at this, it's like, duh, saved by grace. This is like the biggest verse. This is a gift of God, right? You are saved by grace, not by your works, right? And that's one of the big verses people say, see, you're not saved by your actions, okay? The second verse I'll take a look at is 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. And this is talking about faith, right? And it says, "Though you have not seen him, you love him, and even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls," right? So the end result of faith is salvation for your soul. So here's talking about salvation by faith, right? So we're thinking to ourselves but isn't grace and faith the same? They are not the same. Grace and faith are 2 different things. They're similar, they're connected, but they're not the same thing. Now, last but not least, very, very famous verse also in James chapter 2, verse 26, and this talks about if you're saved by faith, but one thing interesting it says here is, as the body without the spirit is dead, so your faith without deeds is dead, right? So it's saying here that, hey, if you don't have any actions, then you don't even really have faith. So it's kind of saying like, well, does that mean you're saved by your actions? And what I'm going to do is I'm telling you right now, we just read 3 verses. They're all from the Bible. You cannot say one doesn't exist or one that, oh, that's wrong. Then you're saying the Bible's wrong. What I want to talk about is how can all 3 of these exist together? And I would say that they all coexist. And the key is I want you guys to think about in terms of grace, faith, and action. Think about it in terms of relationship, right? Like a real relationship between you and God. And I'm going to say there's 3 stages of salvation, and all 3 are important, right? But of course, the first is the most important one, right? All 3 are important, but the first is the most important. What is that? This is saved by grace. And, we've heard this many times. What is grace? It is the gift of God. Now, what does it mean in the Bible when it says, you are saved by grace, not by works. You know, there's actually a verse in the Bible. We won't turn to it or anything. I think it's like Isaiah 64 verse 6. It says that your actions are filthy rags. Like there are stuff in the Bible that really put down actions, right? But it's like going, you're saved by grace. It is the gift of God. What does it mean that you're saved by grace and not by works? What does it really mean in this verse? It means that there's not a single person in this world that has deserved it. When we celebrate Easter and we see what Jesus did for us, there's not a single person that said, I deserve it, Jesus. You owe me. You owe me the cross. You owe me salvation. Like there's no one who can say that. There's no one who has worked and said, I have to have this. No, it is the gift of God, right? Jesus being sent to this earth, dying on the cross and resurrection, that is a gift. He died for the very people who hated him. He died for his enemies. That's why in the Beatitudes, right? In Matthew chapter 5, what does Jesus say? He says, love your enemies. And when you really think about it, when Jesus tells the religious leaders, love your enemies, he's really talking about himself, right? He's talking about, hey, I am your biggest enemy right now, but you should love your enemies because you have no idea in whom God is working through. And there are many instances in the Bible where God's people have been helped by their enemies. A big example would be King Josiah, right? I think that's like in 2 Chronicles chapter 35. It talks about like a heathen nation helping Israel. And this is the thing that we have to understand is what? We are saved by grace. And this is first and foremost the greatest thing that happens because without this grace, salvation is impossible to happen. Okay? Now, when we talk about relationship, as I said in the very beginning, this first stage of saved by grace is actually God's responsibility. This is what God does for us. Remember, we didn't do anything to deserve it. We didn't do anything to say, God, give me faith right now. But instead, it is God giving us the gift. And this gift is Christ who dies for us. Our sins are forgiven. And then we receive salvation. It is God's gift, right? So in a relationship, it's someone talking to us, someone reaching out to us, someone helping us. The second stage when it comes to salvation is faith. Now, how is faith different than grace? Grace is what God gives us. Faith is the choice you make, which means in a relationship, if someone does something for you, you do something for them. Someone talks to you, you talk back, and that's a conversation. And when we look at saved by faith, faith is human responsibility. It is the response to God's grace. It's what we do. So then how does faith come in? How do I know for sure that faith is a responsibility and something that we make a choice in? First, I want you to take a look at Romans chapter 10, verse 14. Okay? And Romans 10:14 is very interesting because it talks about, this is why it's so important. Romans 10:14 says, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them, right? Which means that, it's like, wait a second. In order for faith to happen, someone's got to preach to them first. It's not some kind of natural thing where you're like going, oh, I have faith. I believe. No, you got to hear the gospel. That's why when you go to church, when people come to believe in Jesus, they don't just sit there like, I believe. No, they hear the gospel. They listen to the praise. They're inspired and moved. Something tugs at their heart and then they say, I believe. Right? Why? If you go down to Romans 10:17, that's the clear answer. Romans 10:17 says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. How does faith come? Faith cannot come until you hear the message, which means that you go to church. How many people have gone to church? They hear the message and they don't respond. They make a choice, I don't want to believe. But then others like us who are watching right now, we respond to God and we say, I will believe. I will have faith. This is enough for me to believe because we heard the words of God. Right? So when we look at this, faith is something that happens after hearing the word of Christ, which is human responsibility, it is the second step of us reaching out back to God, right? One of the most famous verses in the Bible is Matthew 7:7. Ask, seek, knock. It is our responsibility to ask, seek, and knock, and God's responsibility to respond. Why? That's what a true relationship is. God gives grace. God sends the Messiah. Human beings, we hear the message, the gospel of the one of Jesus, and we respond to it. And that's the second stage, is for us to make a choice to believe. It's us reaching out back to God. Now, where do actions come in? Right? We're not saved by actions. Now, here's the thing that here's one thing that I don't really like about when we teach about works. I think we get a little bit too extreme, right? So we're like going, no, you're not saved by deeds. And the answer is, it's true. You're not really saved by your actions and your deeds. However, people go a little bit too extreme and they're like, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you have faith. And I'd be like, no, I don't think that's true. I think that matters. Like, you can't go so extreme in saying what you do it doesn't matter at all. Because even in the Bible, like in when you talk about Judgment Day in Revelation chapter 20, it actually talks about, and everyone is judged according to what they have done. Ugh, right? We're actually called to take different actions than we did before. We just say it in a different way. Hey, become a new creation. Hey, be better than you were before. Hey, now you live a life in Christ. Be Christ-like. What does it mean? It actually means have different actions, different works, different deeds, right? Like one of the things you'll see, look at 1 John chapter 3, verse 9. And 1 John chapter 3, verse 9, here's one of the things that God says to us. He says, no one who is born of God will continue to sin because God's seed remains in them. You can't go on sinning, which means that there are actions you must take. Living righteously, not living a life of sin. We have to change our actions and do different actions. It's calling us to take action in different ways, right? It's kind of like, whoa, what does that mean? It doesn't make any sense. You say that actions don't matter because, we read in Saved by Grace is like not by works, but by grace, the gift of God. But what does it mean, right? Well, you're saved by grace, God reaching out to us. And we're saved by faith, us reaching out to God and us having faith. And where actions come in is, I like how James puts it the best in James chapter 2, verse 22. And he's talking about Abraham here. But Abraham didn't just have faith, but he did exactly what God said, right? And James 2:22 says, you see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And I think this is the best way to look at actions. Your actions complete your faith. It's not you're saved by your actions. Why? Because what I know for certain is people who don't even mean it can say good things about me. It's like, oh, Scott, you're good. Yeah, Scott, you're great. Oh, you're awesome. But if they don't mean it, for me, when I can't feel it, I can't really accept it, right? And you know that there's some people who'll do things without any feeling. You want someone, like imagine you marry someone, don't you want them to not just do the actions of love, but also truly love you deeply in your heart? You can't say, oh, I love you, but I cheat on you every day. That means your actions and your heart are not in line. They're not complete. Faith is made complete by what you do. It's a completion of it, right? So we have to have faith, but if you truly, truly believe, that true faith and belief compels you to take the right actions, right? Imagine you have like a cliff, two cliffs, and it's like, you have a pit. So if you jump off, you die. But someone says to you, hey, there's an imaginary bridge. Just walk. Would you walk? And the answer is, depends how much I believed it. Because if you truly believed there was an invisible bridge, you'd walk it. Right? Imagine someone says to you, hey, dude, there's an invisible bridge. Just walk. And then you look at them and you say, well, dude, if there's really an invisible bridge, why don't you go first? No, you go first. Then you're going to be like, okay, this person doesn't really believe what they're saying. right? And that's something we have to understand is, there's 3 stages to salvation. And this is kind of like an Easter message for all of us here. You are saved first and foremost by grace. And that is number 1. Without that, nothing happens. It doesn't even matter if you have faith or not. Without the grace, it cannot happen. That's why it's number 1. And then number 2 is it's our response to the grace, to the gift. Do you want the gift or not? That's why John 3:16 is so easy. It's like, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whosoever believes, which means now is whoever reaches out to have faith shall not perish but have everlasting life. But how do I know my faith is true? It is made complete by what you do in your life, right? And that's what I would say. Those 3 things are working together as one, right? And that's why I'm not here to say that, oh, you're saved by works. Oh, you're saved. No, it's not none of these things. They're all working together, right? You're saved by grace. You're saved by faith. And when that faith is made complete, we are securing that salvation.